Blessings, folks. Welcome back to another episode of the Hitstreak. I'm your man, Nick Hyder, and in the Hit Lab with me today, I've got somebody really special. Not just to me, but to millions. And, dude, like, I am blown away with what this cat has accomplished in a very short time here on this earth. But check it out, folks. He is an ESPN play-by-play sports commentator and the host of the O Show. I have the one and only Jack O'Hara in the building. Bro, what's happening?
Nick Hyder, the Hitstreak podcast in the Hit Lab, Nashville, Tennessee. First time ever for me. It's been an honor, man.
Well, brother, like, so you don't live here. Like, how far did you come to do this?
Oh, what is it, like a 4-hour flight? You've made the flight from Nashville to Phoenix.
That's right.
4 hours long?
That's right, yeah. It's a minute.
It's crazy. My brother obviously has space out here, so I've been kicking it on Broadway Street?
Yeah, Broadway, yeah.
It's crazy downtown. Like, I was telling Jim beforehand, like 11 a.m. on a Friday, people are really dialed in. You know, I'm like, that's where like the 50-year-old in me comes out. I'm 23 years old, but I don't act it. So like when people tell me, they're like, I thought you were like at least 30, you know? It's like, I'm like, man, I would never want to do this. But I'm very thankful that you've invited me on today. I know we did my show a few months ago when you were in Scottsdale. That was a really fun time. Getting to meet the crowd. Obviously, Rack Financial's kicking off now. You had Cole on. I saw that episode as well. I'm kind of like a nerd in that sense. I try to absorb as much information as possible and meet as many people as possible. So,
well, I mean, like, here. First of all, the flight, it's about 4 hours. It's two movies. That's how I time the flights, right?
I actually had a layover in Houston, and I was in Houston. I got a steak, and then it was like a 50-minute flight from Houston.
Gotcha. Yeah, Houston's an easy one. It's like I feel like you're just jumping over a pond.
Exactly.
Well, man, like, so we were a guest on Rhea and I both. It's always better when Rhee's there. You know what I'm saying?
Husband and wife, you always have that back and forth banter. It always makes it better.
Not everybody loves me. I'm not it for everybody, but everybody loves Rhee. Everybody loves Rhee. But we did your show. It was one of those things where you didn't even know that we were going to be in town until last minute. You were able to put it all together. We had a great time, man.
And that's the best part about being in the podcast space is just getting a random call. Peter Meyerhoff, thank you very much. He's helped me out a lot. Like he hasn't had to, and he goes out of his way to help me out a lot with people and introducing me. So I'm very grateful for Peter. But yeah, I just got a call. He's like, one of my guys, Nick Hyder, is going to be in town. He's looking to do a podcast. Thought about you. I'm like, okay. So like 24 hours notice, I'm like trying to figure out, we have a few different studio spaces that we can work with. I'm like, like an emergency, 24 hours. Can we get it done? And we were able to find a space to get you guys in. And then we went to the cigar bar afterwards, you introduced me to Dane and everybody, which was a really fun time. But that's what I love most about it is literally like those last minute things of like, oh my God, we can interview so-and-so.
Yeah.
And like, let's do it.
Dude, it was cool. It was a lot of fun. And like, folks, you've done over 550 episods of your podcast. Like, I've been doing this for a minute, and we're right at the 60 episode mark, give or take. It's a job, man. 550 episodes is incredible.
It is a job. But you, like I was telling you guys, Connor, Jim, you guys have a well-oiled machine here. Like, it's very easy to shoot stuff when you're shooting it out of here. I remember I started out shooting it out of, we have a basement bar in my home state of New Jersey, is where I originally shot it out of, literally just with my iPhone. So my iPhone has like the voice memo app, and I would just click voice memo, and then I would use, I think I used my iPad for voice memo, and I used my phone to call the person to interview them. Because back in the day, like, it was just audio. You know? I feel like when COVID happened, that's when everybody really started utilizing Zoom and Skype and everything for video content.
That's right.
But that's how I started. I would do it out of my dorm room. I went to Grand Canyon University in Phoenix. That's how I kind of got out into the Arizona space. And I would just record in like a conference room. The AC would turn on and off over and over again, like 5 times throughout the episode. So the audio was kind of rough. Didn't know how to edit at the time when I started either. I was just a kid. Like, raw audio was really bad. You can go check it out. It's all still out there back like those first 50 to 100 episodes.
Yeah, man.
And then when COVID hit, we were talking about, that's when it all like kind of came together. Zoom was an option. So like you could record via video. It could be more of a vodcast, starting a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And that's when like the big names who wouldn't typically be available became available because they had nothing else to do. It's
That's
like,
right.
if I can't get them now, I'm never going to get them, So I was able to key in. And once you get one or two, people take notice and kind of spirals from there.
So COVID, that was a couple years ago. So you would have been barely 21 years old, right?
Correct.
And so walk me through. I have a 13-year-old son. He's going to listen to this. He's going to get a lot out of this episode, right?
I hope so.
Because ironically, like, you're closer to his age than you are to mine.
That's crazy.
I know, right?
Because when you're 13, you're like, I'm a child. And when you're 21, you're like, I'm an adult. Like, you're a completely different person.
That's right.
Like, completely different person.
That's right. Well, man, like, I've had a lot of great conversations, and something that is talked about a lot is that, people are going to school for 13 to 17 or more years, and they're coming out and they're having a hard time applying all the knowledge that they learned in school to a lifestyle, or just how to, got a marketing degree. That's great. Tell me how you can generate revenue with marketing. And most of them don't know how to do that. So like, I'd just say you're just way more, from a business perspective, way more mature than the average 20 or 21-year-old. That's a young adult is what we'll say. Right. So like, walk me through that. Like, how'd you get there?
I just figured this out too. Like, when it comes to being mature for a young kid, like I was telling you before, just walking on Broadway, some people are just partying it up, and I love it. Like, it's a great atmosphere. A lot of businesses making a lot of money off of that partying. Mm-hmm. It was never my scene. I was always the kid at home just watching Yankee games growing up, knowing exactly what I wanted to do, watching Michael Kay on the Yes Network. I was like, I want to do that. He gets paid to call New York Yankee games and baseball games.
That's right.
So I knew at the age of 5 what I wanted to do growing up. And I think it's because all of my idols growing up, whether it be Michael Kay calling baseball games, Chris Jericho, professional wrestler, huge inspiration of mine of how creative he is in a ton of different spaces. I'm a huge rock and roll guy.
That's cool.
So is he. Dave Grohl, the Foo Fighters,
absolutely.
The way he carries himself above anything else. I'm not a musician. My brother's a huge musician, but just the way that guy carries himself for being like the face of rock and roll, just a down-to-earth guy, I'm inspired by that, and that's who I want to come off as, someone who's as genuine as hell, and at the same time considered one of the more giving and nice for people in the industry that you work with. Because the more people you work with that are like that, the happier everybody is going to be involved, right? Not only just spiritually, but financially, professionally, all the above. So all of my idols, when I was 17 years old, were in their 40s and 50s. So I carried myself as a 40 or 50-year-old. And it just clicked with me like a couple weeks ago. I'm like, that's why I act so old and people think I'm older. Because all of my idols that I look up to and I try to, duplicate myself after are all in their 40s and 50s. So I think that's why I'm mature. And I've always been intrigued by that space. So I don't think it was necessarily like, oh, I just like didn't like fit in a way. It was more so like I was just always drawn to that crowd.
That's a very interesting perspective, and it's like you mentioned, Dave Grohl. That guy went from being the drummer of a band that all real musicians made fun of because grunge wasn't really respected because everything was so simple, to now he's playing with the greatest of the greats, sharing the stage with them on whether it's guitar, singing, or drums or whatever. Like, he's incredible. He absolutely is incredible, and what they've been able to do, how they've transitioned so many times. Even losing their drummer this year and everything else, but there's you still see him. He's on stages. He's still doing stuff. It's cool, man. It's
crazy. I actually you mentioned Taylor Hawkins, rest in peace. I got a chance to meet him too a little bit earlier this year. So this is the main thing that I love about my job and what I do is that at the end of the day, like, someone asked me on a podcast a couple of weeks ago, like, who is Jack O'Hara? And I'm like, oh wow, like that's a pretty deep question. It's simply deep. It's like, I'm a storyteller. I'm a storyteller who really doesn't, give two Fs about what anybody else thinks. I'm going to do it my way. That's important to me too. Because even like on ESPN, like, I wouldn't necessarily say I fall in line. Like, obviously there's certain things you got to regulate, but like, I have my own style of what I want my voice to sound like, as opposed to mimicking someone else or being like, I want to be the next Bob Costas. Like, why would you want to be the next Bob Costas when you could be the first Jack O'Hara or the first Nick Hyder, So that was very important to me. And then being a storyteller, I'll get to that story. Foo Fighters were headlining an event. This was probably the second to last show they did before he passed.
Wow.
In Tempe, Arizona. It's called the Innings Festival.
Okay.
And it's hosted by Major League Baseball. So Major League former players come in, and that's where I get my credential. I interview everybody. And I got a chance to meet Chris Shiflett and Rami Jaffe from the Foo Fighters backstage. And they're just like, oh, you want a T-shirt, man? T-shirt Taylor. And Taylor was like giving away all these T-shirts. So he's like, yeah, absolutely, man. Threw me a T-shirt. I'm like, oh, thanks so much, man. Big fan. And then I rushed back because I only had a few minutes to really get to talk to people in catering. And I throw on the shirt immediately, and it's like up to here on me, like a tank top. I'm like, it's a woman's large. Like, what am I going to do? So the girl that came with me that night, I just gave it to her. And then 2 weeks later, he was gone. And I'm like, wow. I call that girl like at least a couple times a month. Like, you still have the shirt? It was like, Taylor Hawkins gave me that shirt. I just want to make sure, you're taking good care of it and it just doesn't get lost or something. It's
so cool. We mentioned on your show that the Foo Fighters and my son's, he's a big musician, and they're by far his favorite. And Lance Wascom, one of the co-founders of AVLX, the company that built this studio, and a previous guest and a great man and a great friend, through their business, he has a lot of connections. And not long before, literally just a few months before all that went down, he made a call, and they sent him like the set list, everybody's picks from the concert, and some used sticks from Taylor, which he has, and they're all framed up and put up, and oh man! And then of course all that happened later, and there's talk to you about how big of an impact a band like that has. There's certain parts of your life where like, I will never forget where I was standing when I heard about 9/11 for the first time. Yeah. I will never forget where I was in my car when I read on Instagram from the Foo Fighters that Taylor had passed for the first time. I'll never forget that.
I was the same way, because you talk about like huge deaths like that when it comes to people that actually inspire you. Like, your son's probably the same way. I'm not a musician, but I'm such a big fan. The thought of Taylor Hawkins just ripping it on a drum kit probably enters my mind like a dozen times a day, just thinking thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
So like when that happened, I immediately was just like, is it real?
Yeah.
Like texted my dad, my brother. My brother was just like, Taylor fucking Hawkins.
That's
like,
right.
Are you sure? Are you sure this isn't BS?
Yeah.
And we're like, no, it's like, holy crap. Like, this is our favorite band. And they were the one band for 25 years that like, they didn't have death in the band, like there was no drama ever.
That's right.
This was like the first time where it was like, oh my god. Like, even when Kobe Bryant died, I'm not a huge NBA guy, but like, it was huge news.
Yeah.
But I remember
where I was standing when I found that out.
Yeah, I was in my college dorm room. I'm like, TMZ broke it, so like, can we really trust it? But like, the last time I thought of Kobe Bryant before that was probably like when he retired 4 years prior. Like Taylor Hawkins was someone I still think about like all the time. I'm like, oh my god.
That's right.
Like, he's gone. He's really gone.
That's right. They were, they just always, like, most of the time when you're in your 40s or 50s, you're on the way out in the music scene, and it was like they were just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's in their movie that they had just put out, like, literally like a couple weeks or a month before he passed. I took my son to see that. Don't judge me, parents. He loved it, and he's watched it multiple times since then. It was hysterical. I love that movie.
For a band who has no acting ability at all, it was hilarious.
Well, all their music videos were the best anyways, right?
Oh my god. Grohl is just on another level, and the fact that the other five kind of kept up with him all these years too, because like, I think that's like the running joke. Even in the movie, you see them just like, oh, we want to get out of here. Like, like, he's just crazy.
Well, man, so talk to me a little bit about how, first of all, let's just stay on the podcast for a minute, because like, some of your guests include Magic Johnson, Grant Cardone, Jordan Belfort, Dave Matthews, Bob Saget, Cheech and Chong, Carol Baskin. The list goes on and on and on. And I can tell you, I've had some amazing folks on here, but like, when you get the bigger the name people, they're busy, dude. They're all over the world. They're traveling. So like, here you are, not even a 25-year-old man, and you're getting the biggest names on the planet. Mm-hmm. How in the world?
Well, it all started again with COVID. Getting Jordan Belfort on, he was easy. I attended a webinar, which was supposed to be a seminar in Atlantic City, New Jersey, that I wanted to go to. And then COVID hit, so he turned it into a webinar. And everybody kind of got a chance to ask him a question. I was just like, hey, I do this podcast. We're like 200 episodes deep. He's like, yeah, absolutely, because why not? And, if you go back and listen, I probably asked like 2 or 3 questions, and he kind of just told his entire life story for about an hour, which was fine by me because it's all great stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Even looking back at it now, like getting into the sales game, I'm just like, oh, this is insanely valuable. Where like at the time, I'm just a journalist with a journalism degree, just trying to get an interview with a big name.
Okay.
And then we were able to get a few other big names. We had Chad Michael Murray, who's a big actor, Drake Bell, Josh Peck from that Nickelodeon show back in the day.
Josh Peck is hysterical.
He is very funny. Has been able to evolve as well over the years. Bob Saget was during COVID as well.
Gotcha.
Insanely nice person.
Yeah.
It's like Rob Schneider.
Oh, wow.
Was awesome. As soon as I hopped on the Zoom call, like that one I was kind of nervous for him. Like, I've watched his movies since I was like 5. He's just like, Jack, handsome man, what's going on? I'm just like, oh, I'm relaxed. This guy's awesome. Because you never really know. Like with big names, you always hear like never meet your heroes.
Yeah.
And it's like, I haven't had one of those experiences yet. Thank goodness. Everybody's been so kind to me in this industry. And even getting a degree in journalism and media from Grand Canyon University, like, everybody's looking to help each other out. It's up to you. Like, you really want it at the end of the day? Because people are going to help you if you want to get better, you know? And we've seen it throughout, you know, my time doing this the last 6-7 years. You know who wants it and who doesn't, because the people that want it are still here. The people that don't kind of fizzled out and are doing whatever the hell they're doing.
Amen to that. Well, like, so first of all, getting those names is a huge accomplishment in its own. But like, when you get those names, you get their fans who have opinions and all those things. So, you know, I think one of the craziest things that I learned when we started doing this and it really started to take off was not just the good responses that you get, but the amount of negative. Everybody's just got an opinion, and that's totally cool. And you know what? I've learned a lot. I read, we study it. We take everything. It's a suggestion, man. Somebody volunteered their time and their opinion. Whether it holds water or not, we get to decide that. But we can always learn, and we're always looking to get better. When we're done today, I'll ask you, how'd I do? What can I do better? Right? So, like, how did you I'm old enough now. Life's beat me up and spit me out, chewed me up, spit me out multiple times. I don't know. I remember the first time as a player when I wasn't much older than you. My very first professional game, my second professional game. It was our first one on the road. It was my first start. Everybody knows that's on the home team. We were in. Where were we? We were in Gateway Stadium in St. Louis. Well, guess who they picked to be the strikeout? If I strike out, everybody gets free beer. Right. So, man, you should have heard. I heard everything they said from the stands that day. Yeah. And it messed with me. It really did. It got under my skin a little bit. I hadn't learned how to use that, block it out, and use it to my advantage. You probably had some crazy things said to you, yet you persevered through. Like, you wouldn't believe how much people care about what other people think.
Oh my God. Losers, in my opinion. I don't know if that's too harsh, but like legitimately, like I said before, I don't really give two Fs about what anybody thinks. I'm going to do whatever. Yeah. You know, like I know I have my quirks, I have my things that are my strengths, my weaknesses, but like this is what I want to do, and I'm going head first. You know, like what's the worst? That's my life motto. What's the worst that could happen? You know,
I like that.
What is like the absolute worst that could happen? Is that you fail, you learn from it. Someone didn't like you. I actually had a guy a few years ago who I guess listened to me at the time, just call me out on the street. I was in San Diego for the MLB winter meetings, which is actually where I'm going immediately after this trip to Nashville. And a guy just pointed me out on the street. He's like, "Oh, don't listen to him. He has no idea what he's talking about." You know, it was like, "That's Jack O'Hara from the O Show." I'm like, first of all, I'm kind of flattered that I actually had someone. I'm like, "Oh, I have no idea who you are."
That's right.
You're not my mom or dad, and you're listening to my show, so thank you. But like, yeah, in the moment, I'm like, oh, I guess, like, whatever. But I knew at the time I was 20 years old. I was still in college, still learning it. It was still technically a resume builder project that I was doing.
Gotcha.
It wasn't until I graduated when I had two businesses come to me looking for, like, sponsorships. Like, we'll give you X amount of money to just put our stuff in your studio. And I'm just like, oh, this is a business.
That's right.
And that's when it kind of changed not changed, but, like, that switch came on. Like now it's about creating revenue, bringing on people, making this bigger than it actually is. But yeah, I mean, all the time. Honestly, in today's world, I don't get too much of it unless it's like on YouTube, which I don't really care. Those people don't even show their faces on their accounts.
Yeah.
I honestly like have a chip on my shoulder when people not necessarily like introduce me in a way, but like, oh, this is Jack. He's a young up and comer, you know, stuff like that. Where it's like, I get it, I'm 23 years old, but it's like, I've been doing this a long time, and I feel like I can go just with the best of them.
Absolutely.
Whether it be on ESPN, when I'm doing play-by-play with like a 60-year-old color guy who's just like, oh yeah, this is, young kid, he's still learning the ropes. It's like, I guess I'll look back at it and think like, yeah, maybe they were right, but I feel like I'm the best at what I do right now, and sometimes like I have that chip on my shoulder when people are just like, hey man, like, up and comer, he's got this little show, go on his show, and I'm just like, we'll see. A few years you'll be like, oh yeah.
Dude, it was we were ecstatic to come on. It was a big deal. I mean, we were super proud to do it, and like I say, it was a big deal. It's still a big deal, and it's something that we're proud to say that we did. It's something that, like, we promote that episode a lot on a lot of our stuff. It's cool, man.
I appreciate it. It's funny. This week, I always told my brother when I first started the O Show, because anybody who listens, they notice, like, the O is very familiar. It's the Baltimore Orioles O. Mm-hmm. And I always told him, like, when we first started, I'm like, we'll know we made it when someone from that franchise comes after us for copyright.
That's exactly how you think.
This past Wednesday, I got an email from the Baltimore Orioles PR saying, that's our logo. Can you kind of like alter it, or else you're going to get fined?
Are you serious?
And I immediately texted my brother. I'm like, what did I tell you like 5-6 years ago? He's like, oh, when the Baltimore Orioles call you. I'm like, yep. I sent him the screenshot of the email. I'm like, we made it. I mean, not necessarily made it, but like we're getting there.
Absolutely. So, like, you're going to make some tweaks to it. I guess they'll decide if you made enough tweaks or not. Like, how does that work?
I guess I got to send them something. I kind of rebranded our YouTube channel to Jack O'Hara TV because I always figured it was easier. When people introduce, they're like, this is Jack from like the O'Hara Show or the Jack O'Hara. So I'm like, honestly, like it's probably easier just to say like, Jack O'Hara TV. It's easy. That way I could brand not only my podcast, but any other videos I want to make, maybe just put broadcast reels. I want to get into the film space, direct some stuff, direct documentaries. So like once it all comes together, it's just the Jack O'Hara brand.
That's right. That
way nobody finds me for using their logo.
That's right. And kudos to the Baltimore Orioles for, recognizing it and then reaching out like they did instead of being, they could have been jerks about it. You know what I mean?
They could wiped all my stuff.
They could totally gone a different route over that. So that's pretty cool.
Steinbrenner would have done that.
Absolutely, and as another Yankee fan myself, good job Baltimore, but that's all you get. That's all I can say.
Yeah, focus on winning some baseball games.
That's right. Let's go. So, talk to me about how you got involved with ESPN. That's a pretty big.
Yeah.
Like you went straight for the big time and got it.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, like I said, since I was 5, I wanted to be a play-by-play sports commentator. So when I got to college, I honestly should have started earlier. Looking back at it, I'm like, I could have been the one and only commentator in high school because we didn't really have like a broadcast network or system. I wish I kind of went out of my way. I could have done it literally from my laptop. But you live and you learn. When I started in college, all 4 years, had multiple internships, wanted to travel the country too. I had play-by-play commentating internships in Los Angeles, got to live in LA, a kid from the East Coast. I was in awe of that. Mm-hmm. Got to live down in Charlotte, North Carolina for a summer, doing play-by-play in the minor leagues. And then at GCU, we have honestly the best broadcast department, I think, in any other organization or, I guess, school I've ever seen for students. Obviously the bigger schools, they bring in Fox, they bring in ESPN to call their games. Yeah. But for a student-run program, the amount of equipment that we were able to use, and that's when ESPN Plus came. ESPN's like, they have a legitimate setup. We want to partner with them and affiliate. So when I was a sophomore, ESPN Plus was our main affiliator. So we all had to sign contracts with ESPN through college. So now we're saying like, oh, Jack O'Hara here on ESPN, which was like an honor at like 20 years old.
Absolutely.
And by the time I graduated, they already knew me. I was arguably, not to pat myself on the back, probably one of the better play-by-play voices in the student program at the time. Mm-hmm. Immediately talked to the ESPN talent producers who bring in talent. I'm like, I'm ready to go. Like whether it be for GCU, maybe ASU games, put me in tennis matches, volleyball, soccer, like whatever you got to do. Because obviously baseball and football, those are the big times. Those are the babies that they don't want to take the risk on. I'm like, give me the smaller games. So I got to sign a freelance contract with them. And now I'm basically just like on call whenever they need me. So it's like doing softball games are fun because it's just like baseball.
Yep.
Plus and minus a few different name changes, which I always get in trouble for. That's the other thing. Like, I feel like I said, I have my own voice in this. I use some of my inspirations to put out my own voice as a broadcaster. And sometimes you get in trouble. Like I was telling someone the other day, instead of sacrifice bunt, I accidentally, just because I had a blunder, said sacrifice blunt on the air, which honestly wasn't a huge deal. Unfortunately, it was April 20th, and I recognized that right away. So I immediately just elaborated on the fact that I made that mistake. And I'm like, well, it's just 420. And that's all I was thinking about. And my producer's like, you shouldn't have said that. And I got written up. You get like a 3-strike policy. And I think throughout my 4 years in college, I had 5 or 6 strikes. Never got to 3 in one semester, but I always just because I always kind of pushed the needle. I'm like, we should do this, we should do that. And they were always like, that's a little too much. But I always enjoyed doing it.
That's usually how you know how it was too much, is when you get there.
Oh, yeah. I said accidentally shot cock instead of shot clock in a basketball game. It was my first ever broadcast freshman year, too. It was the first thing that ever came out of my mouth.
Oh, my God.
I was a color commentator, and there was a layup at the shot clock. I was just like, yeah, at the shot cock, and immediately they call them cough buttons to kind of mute you. They're just like, what did you just say? And they were all just sarcastically clapping in the back when we got back. Like, nice job, kid.
Reminds me of that the commentators Jason Bateman in in Dodgeball with all this funny stuff they would do.
Ocho. Was it the Ocho?
ESPN the Ocho. That's right. Well, the one of the so I had a question for you that you don't know I'm going to ask. But being a baseball fan, what are your top 3 baseball movies that you love to watch that you go back to over and over again?
Ooh, I like The Natural.
Okay.
I don't think it's realistic, but I love the story. I think that was the first one I ever watched as a kid as well.
Okay.
Off-color one, Benchwarmers, with Rob Schneider, David Spade, John Heater. I really like that one. They must put steroids in macaroni. I love that line. Bull Durham.
Yeah.
Probably one of my favorites as well. The one that I don't like, just because I am a film buff and I like continuity. It wasn't The Field of Dreams, which is another great one. For the Love of the Game with Kevin Costner, where he throws the perfect game. There were just so many things that you'd notice. Like at the end of the game, he threw the perfect game, and the batter was number 13, and he was a righty. But as he was walking back to the dugout with his head down, he was number 74 with a left-hander's batter's helmet on, and I'm like, that doesn't make sense at all. And I picked that up as a 6-year-old kid. I'm like, Dad, what was it? He's like, I didn't even notice.
Yeah.
But good story as well.
Yeah.
But as a film buff, I'd say my top 3: Field of Dreams, Benchwarmers. I'll go Bull Durham too as those 3.
Absolutely. Where do the major league ones pop up there for you?
I was listening to Wild Thing on the way over here. That's funny. I love that song. I love the first Major League.
Yeah.
The first Major League's really good. The second one, it was just very different.
So the guy that played Parkman in the second one is David Keith. He's he might still live here. It's been a while since I'd seen him, but he was a super cool dude, man, and he played such a jerk in that.
I know.
And but we just loved it.
As an actor, you probably love that role too. I always say, if I was a pro wrestler, if I was an actor, you want to be the heel, you want to be the bad guy. It's you can literally just unleash.
That's right.
And there's nobody's gonna be like, what the hell, man?
That's right.
You can literally just be the worst version of yourself. And
that's right. Well, what's the besides any cool stories about some of the awesome guests you had that stand out? Maybe people that we don't know. Some things that stand out.
Love a lot of the conversations that I've had. I'll tell you the Dave Matthews one.
Okay.
Just because my family is diehard Dave Matthews Band fans. He has a cult following. It's them, Fish.
Biggest cult ever.
Grateful Dead, I think, is pretty big in that cult as well. Got the chance to interview him at the same festival, actually, Innings Festival in Tempe, Arizona, hosted by Major League Baseball 2 years prior. So this was right before COVID hit, 2 weeks before COVID hit. And I got the chance to interview, it was Dave Matthews from Dave Matthews Band, it was Rivers Cuomo from Weezer, and it was Ben Gibbard from Death Cab for Cutie.
Holy cow.
So 2 of those guys, Ben Gibbard, great guy. Rivers Cuomo, great guy. Just Harvard guy. You could just tell, I'm way smarter than I'll ever be. But then Dave Matthews, who's the headliner, came along. And at this point, Rivers Cuomo and Ben Gibbard were so nice. I didn't even know we weren't allowed to record audio with our phone. And I don't know why, because I was there as an affiliate of a news website. So I was just there to write articles about the interviews. So everything had to be handwritten.
Gotcha.
So by the time, but those guys didn't tell me. They didn't care. Right. By the time I got to Dave Matthews, though, I was the only guy kind of just holding my phone up, asked him a question, kind of put it in his face. He immediately just swiped it out of my face, and the phone goes flying on the concrete and just shatters everywhere.
No.
I'm just like, oh my God. So I thought, I can't pick up my phone. I'm just going to be a professional and just ask the questions I want to ask. So I got to ask him like 2 or 3 questions, and then he's just like, all right, that's enough. I got to go. It's like really wasn't like, I mean, at that point you're headlining a show with like 30,000 people. It's like, whatever, like you probably have a lot on your mind and you're going 100% for like days on end. But yeah, I still have the phone completely shattered. Like it almost gives me paper cuts every time I like pick it up, but I still have it because the day I interview him again, and I will interview him again, at very least that'll be a funny story I could
absolutely
show, like back in his face. But that was honestly like the worst experience I had, you could say, but it's still a fun story to tell because my family loves Dave Matthews, and I called my brother after, and he was just like, well, did you piss him off? Like, what did you do? What did you do to Dave? Like, nobody really cared. Another one, great interview I did. He's a professional wrestler. I actually saw his face on a billboard. His name's Nick Aldis with the NWA. It's a pro wrestling promotion. It was bought out by Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins. And I got the chance to interview him in college, and he was a big deal at the time. He was like the NWA world champion, and he's like, absolutely, kid. Like, you seem like you're really driven at this, whatever. And it was a great interview. And then afterwards, and I learned to never do this again without anybody's permission. I made a piece of content, whether it was like a reel or something at the time, kind of like, because I asked him, like, if you could cross over to like WWE, who would you wrestle? And he was like, Randy Orton, whoever he said. And I kind of like put those faces together on like a content thing and like put it out.
Oh, wow.
And he did not like it. Basically, like, it was clickbait, like started a rumor mill on like websites and like WWE rumors. They're like, oh, is Nick Aldis coming to WWE? Which was not the case at all. And he got really, he's like, I thought you were a professional. Like, this is really like Bush League of you to do. And again, I'm 19. I was like a freshman in college. I was just like, I'm so sorry, Nick, had no idea, whatever. And he's just like, yeah, whatever. So I learned not to do that again. I'd say that was probably the most stinging feel, knowing that like, oh, like I came off as a professional in the interview, but like he doesn't look at me that way anymore. So that's when I'm like, all right, I'm 19. I could learn from that. Other than that, I'm trying to think. Tommy Chong had the best stories ever.
Okay.
Some of the best, like he was telling me how he like was doing blow with Jimi Hendrix 3 days before he had a heart attack and died.
Wow. I'm
just like, no one else has that story.
That's right.
He was telling me how he saw Muhammad Ali cheat on his first wife. I guess he was there at a party or something.
Wow.
And then called Muhammad Ali out on it. And like he's like,
wow.
I don't know why I did that, because he gave me like a death stare.
Yeah.
But he had all of these insane stories as he's just like eating edibles the entire time and just like doing his thing. He's honestly the nicest guy in the world. He sent me a box of his CBD gummies for 6 months to my house after that show.
Wow.
For 6 months. And I lived with 4 devoted Christians who look at weed as like, that's drugs.
Right.
Keep that in your. So I had like boxes in my trunk, just like hoping I don't get pulled over or something. I'm just like, why do you have like 50 pounds of CBD gummies in the back of your car?
And nobody's going to believe that Chong gave it to you.
It's like Tommy Chong. Like, sure, kid, sure. See, another thing. It's like, oh, you're like, what, 21 years old? Yeah, no shot. But he was, because he's like 85 years old too. He doesn't have to be doing interviews, and he still loves it.
That's awesome.
Like, absolutely. I'm like, yeah. Because I was talking about interviewing Jordan Belfort. He's like, yeah, he was my cellmate when we were in prison together.
What?
I was just like, really? So Jordan Belfort, the first book he wrote, The Way of the Wolf, which is a great book on sales, Tommy Chong looked it over the first time and was just like, this sucks. And kind of like set off Jordan Belfort's like ego in that sense of just like, who the hell are you to tell me? And you just like...
Yeah.
And I guess it lit a fire under him, and he came back with like a second copy, and Tommy Chong was just like, yeah, it was a good book. Like, it was good the first time, but I want to see like if he can get better the second time. It's weird how they paired those two together, though. Someone who's just like, I feel like Jordan Belfort's just like on Adderall in his mind all the time.
Oh,
He's like coming up with things to say, where Tommy Chong's just like, hey, man, just like laid back, like, don't worry about it.
Yeah. The you have been exposed to some brilliant minds, and like you mentioned, that's a very interesting thing. Talk about how a guy like Jordan is very, very. It's always moving. It's always fast. He's always. I say guys like him live in the future. They don't live in the present because they don't have time to. They're always thinking about what's next, right? So that's something that my wife says I'm guilty of a lot, and she's always telling me to live in the present some more. But who else like? I believe that when you get to a certain level of success, no matter what it is that you do, there's certain core things that everybody has in common. And just like, what makes a house is what makes it a house. The same as everything, but they come in all shapes and sizes and locations, right? So there's like in business, we study that. No matter what industry they're in or what product they sell or whatever, there's certain things that all great businesses have in common. As a matter of fact, there's 8 core principles that Marcus Whitney gave me a while back, and I've studied the hell out of them, and sure enough, that's what they are. What do you see? What do some of like two polar opposites like that, but they have something in common because they became, maybe it's just gel. Maybe that's all they had in common. I don't know. But like, what do you see when you interview? I mean, Magic Johnson and Bob Saget. I was probably that one hurts a lot.
Yeah.
And that guy was incredible.
Yeah.
What do you see?
I think, and I believe, I want to say I have these qualities, maybe not, maybe so. You're just aware. Like, you just have the ability to pick up on conversations, people's vibes, people's, just the atmosphere around you, in the sense of knowing that, okay, I'm here for a reason, and it's not just to like be everybody's best friend. Like, you want to be able to provide value for people. I think Chong and Belfort got along because they both come from that, not the entertainment world. Jordan Belfort now more so, just because of his personality as well as his experiences that the world saw through the movie that Scorsese put together. But they both come from the world of business. Tommy Chong, as an actor, as a comedian, that is business.
Right.
You don't go up there on stage. You don't go on set. You don't do what you do. Even a podcast, you don't do it unless you can monetize it. You can
That's
get something
right.
out of it. I came late into the game with that as well, just because I was a kid and I wanted to do it. Like, I wanted to have my own talk show. And once I was offered something, that's when it kind of switched for me. But everybody kind of has that mindset of like, I want to be known well after I'm gone. I want to be able to create a legacy for myself, not only for myself, but to know that everybody looks at you like he was one of the best, one of the nicest guys, one of the more respected guys, and his teachings still live on today. I feel like everybody, you probably have that knack as well.
Absolutely.
Everybody wants to create that thing that makes them live forever, in a sense. Use a quote from The Natural,
Absolutely.
Like, I want to be able to look back at my life and say, not only did I create a legacy for myself, I created a legacy for my future children, future wife, for the O'Hara name in general. That's important to me. That's really important to me.
Well, everybody we've mentioned didn't have short-term success. It was long-term success.
Yeah.
It was spanned out over years and decades or longer. And what I heard when you were just describing those guys is they were just all, everybody's authentic. They're very authentic to themselves.
Yes.
Right?
It's so much easier to be yourself as opposed to being someone else. And some people fall in, that line of being fake when they don't even realize it. Because when you're a kid, you're in high school, you're in middle school, you just want to you want to have friends, you want to feel accepted.
That's right.
So you just do whatever the clique's doing. I'm guilty of it too.
Yeah.
Until you realize you just feel awful, your energy's drained, and you get to a point where it's like, this is how I want to live my life, and I really don't give a rat's ass as to what anybody thinks.
The clique needs to do what you're doing.
Exactly.
That's right.
Like, when you are the black sheep, that's when everybody recognizes what you're doing, and they actually
right.
take a look, and you're like, oh shit, Jack's got it going on, Nick's got it going on, Connor's got it going on with all of his media stuff, right?
Yeah. You want to stand out.
Yeah, and it's harder, some people see that and they're just like, you don't know what you're doing. And when you're starting out, you don't know what you're doing. When you first started this show, you probably look back at it and be like, man, that's awful. I still look back at my episodes even from a year or two ago. I'm like, man, those are bad questions. I was not listening to my guest. But you learned. You're not going to be a natural overnight,
That's right.
Nobody was a natural overnight.
We watch the first, as a matter of fact, when I first, Brad Lee was one of the first people that I asked about starting a podcast, and he was like, how I did my first episode? And I was like, no, how? He goes, I walked out in the office, and first person I saw, I was like, come here, and sat him down, and that's what we did. So Dale was nice enough for me. I was like, all right, dude, we're about to shoot an episode. Have a seat. Yeah. and we shot our first episode. When we go back and watch them now, it's like watching the first episode or first season of Friends versus like season 5 when they really found their characters. Exactly. And they really came into.
But at least you're interviewing someone you've known your entire life.
That's right.
It's like you can have a good conversation. I remember my first interview was with, he's Mark Zumoff. He's the play-by-play voice of the Philadelphia 76ers. That was like my first like non like brother or dad or friend that I had on the podcast. And it was like an episode, you ever watch SNL back in the day? It was like the Chris Farley show where he's just like awkward. He's like, so you remember when they won that game and you made that call? Just like, yeah. I'm like, that was cool, right? You know, it was honestly like that awkward. Like I had no idea because I was a total introvert growing up. I had no social skills at all, which is why, like, growing up, I was just so fascinated. I'm like, I can just talk about baseball because I know that. Like, that's fun. And then once you get older, things get easier. Once you become the authentic version of yourself, people tend to gravitate towards that more. You know, the people you want to gravitate towards, not just anybody, right?
Absolutely. Well, obviously we believe here that podcasts are extremely important, and
everybody should have one. Yeah,
everybody should have one. As a matter of fact, somebody commented on one of my things today. It says just another rich guy with a podcast or whatever. And I'm like, well, what's the difference in every guitar player that sits on the corner of Broadway or every kid that picks up and wants to learn how to play a set of drums or something like that, man? Like, what's the difference? What's it, if you want to do it and if you want to write songs, you start putting stuff out and getting it out there, and you never know what's going to hit.
Yeah. And we talked about this when you were in Scottsdale, too. There's a difference between having a podcast and having a show. Like, this is a show, right? Where, like you said, anybody could have a podcast. That's the worst thing about podcasting. The best thing about podcasting is that anybody could have a podcast. The worst thing about podcasting is that anybody could have a podcast.
That's right.
However, the ones that are shows stuck at it through the times where it's like, this is not just like something I want to monetize. I feel like a lot of people get into podcasting because they're like, oh, it could be a source of revenue for me. And when they realize that they're getting 12 views on a video, they're just like, what? Like, why isn't anybody listening? Like, this is a waste of my time. Click, and they're done. Where, like, me growing up, I wasn't even focused on the views. I knew it was like my parents, maybe my sister tuning in for a few years there. Yeah. And then once like bigger guests came on, people took notice, and then we went to video. We were able to record out of an awesome studio in Scottsdale for a little bit, bouncing around. We just reached a new deal with the Blue Wire Network out at the Wynn in Las Vegas. Gonna be shooting out of their studio. I got to show you that place as well.
Yeah.
Insanely nice studio. Probably the nicest podcast studio in the country.
Wow.
In my opinion, from what I've seen. No offense to this place. This place rocks, by the way.
Hey, man, it always there's always a bigger fish, and it always gives us something to shoot for.
No, this is a homey field. I was listening to the episode you did with your wife, obviously, a few weeks back, and she was even saying, like, this is a homey feel, you know, and it really is. Like, this is really nice, well-oiled machine, like I said.
Thank you.
Yeah, what was the question, by the way?
I don't even remember. We were rocking and rolling.
Just like... everybody could have a podcast at the end of the day.
That's right.
And it's like the biggest curse. Like if you're able to do it, like I got into this to have stories.
Yes.
I grew up on Dave Grohl. I grew up on Chris Jericho. I grew up watching WWE, Vince McMahon's promotion, which is storytelling at its finest, long term, short term. I remember a funny story, which I think is really cool. I from the beginning of time, like I said, I wanted to be a broadcaster, so I always wrote articles of every sporting event, every concert, everything I ever went to. Wow. Still do to this day.
That's cool.
It's like over like 500 pages of just sporting events. And
That's awesome.
I'd keep the ticket stub, the channel the game was on, the date, the pitching matchup, all of that. And there was one Yankee Red Sox game I went to at Fenway Park. This was 2012, so 10 years ago. Whatever happened in the game happened. But the right fielder at the time, his name was Darnell McDonald. So Darnell McDonald collided with Curtis Granderson on a fly ball for an error or whatever. So I wrote about it. I'm like, Darnell McDonald, dropped the ball, 2 runs scored. Red Sox took a 2-1 lead in the 7th or whatever. So I want to say 8 years later, 2018, 2019, I got the chance to interview Darnell, which is really cool. Really cool guy. Maintained that relationship. Another thing about podcasting, as you know, relationships are everything. Right. So it's like the more people you interview and the more reason you give them a reason to provide value, providing clips on social media, getting their face on camera, which everybody loves. That's kind of a plus. But 3 years later, earlier this year, I launched a podcast with Darnell McDonald, a baseball podcast. Got to have a ton of great people in Major League Baseball on that he's friends with, just talking baseball, which is what I love. It promoted what he's doing with some of his businesses that he has. But I remember thinking back, and I'm like, because I was FaceTiming my dad, I'm like, can you go pull up that scrapbook that I had back in the day and see if I wrote about Darnell McDonald? And he's just flipping through the pages. He's like, July 12th, 2012. Yep, Darnell McDonald drops a fly ball in right field. And I'm like, I get to tell DMAC that because now we're doing a podcast together.
How cool
12 years ago when I was 11, 12 years old.
Man.
I wrote about him in a scrapbook. So like little things like that I really love. And that's really what gets me going.
Absolutely.
About this stuff. Because it's stories like that where you get to look back. Even Dave Matthews, hopefully that comes full circle and I get to share with him. And he's just like, oh, sorry, man. Or maybe he's just like, yeah, that's what I do. He put it on my face. Another guy, I told you this as well. I go to Longhorn Steakhouse like twice a week. I love steak.
Yep.
You know, it's kind of like my big carb day. And there was one day, as a regular there, I don't have to wait. I don't have to do anything. I'm at a point where I don't have to pay, which is like talk about building relationships, you know. And it took me like 4 or 5 years to get to that point, but consistency.
That's right.
Consistency, man. Same with the podcast, 550 plus episodes. The amount of people that you connect with over these years, and they introduce you to other people that you never knew in your wildest dreams that you'd be able to meet or talk to. There was one day Post Malone was in town for this gold festival, and he loves food. He's a huge foodie. Was at Longhorn Steakhouse.
Really?
He was at Longhorn. It's crazy. And he was they were making him like wait for a table. I don't know if they were waiting for him or he was waiting for a table. And I pulled up. I always used to Uber there because I didn't have a car at the time in college. I would just Uber on a Saturday night to Longhorn Steakhouse. And I pull up. There's like 3 of those like black Chevy Tahoe vans, security guards everywhere, a bunch of screaming people. I'm like, oh, I wonder who's in there.
Yeah.
And I get in. I'm like, oh, Post Malone. Like, not a big rap guy, but like I know who he is. Absolutely, Post Malone. This is like when he was like in his peak. Just came out with like his top album at the time. This was 2019. And he's just sitting there like on his phone waiting with like all these fans taking pictures of him. And the manager immediately is just like, Jack, what's going on, man? Bring him to his table. And there's like all these people waiting, including Post Malone. And I remember turning like, all right, like I'm a bigger celebrity than Post Malone today. And I remember turning over and Post Malone's just like, who the fuck is that? Like, he turned to his security guy. He's like, who the hell is that guy? Like, why is he getting? I'm like, because I've put in more work over the last 5 years.
That's right.
You have Austin.